Have you ever wondered how tiny speakers like this can actually put out an impressive amount of bass? The top speaker manufacturers seem to do stuff which defies science. It's like magic. But sorry to disappoint any Harry Potter fans out there, but there's no such thing as magic. And although the speaker manufacturers understand physics extremely well, the hard truth is their sales revenue depends on the fact that you don't. Why? Well, because small speakers are cheaper to build, cheaper to distribute, cheaper to warehouse, and cheaper to ship to the end customer. And at the end of the day, hobbyists don't have room for big speakers in their small home studios. So this is why almost 100% of the pro audio speakers you see at pro audio websites like Sweetwater and Thomann are small speakers. But spoiler alert, small speakers are crap. Why? Basic physics. Sound travels in waves, and lower frequencies have longer wavelengths, and a frequency of 50 Hz has a wavelength of around 6.8 meters, so it's pretty big. Now, if you just want to hear the sound and you don't really care about the quality or accuracy, well, I guess any size speaker will do, but we're supposed to be audio engineers and we're supposed to care about the accuracy of the sounds that we're monitoring. That's why they're called monitors. If we do actually want to hear a high quality, accurate representation of our sound, then there are various formulas to work out how big our speaker cabinets need to be, depending on whether they're sealed, ported, transmission line, tapered tube, or the various different types of speakers that you can build. Now, some of these formulas can be quite complex, and I want to avoid talking about small parameters and the more geeky stuff to try and keep this video accessible. But one oversimplified general rule of thumb that I can offer would be you want to have your speakers somehow proportional to 1/4 of the wavelength of the lowest frequency you want to produce with your speakers. Or even more simply, bigger is better. Why? One of the main reasons is that the size of the speaker cabinets is inversely related to the Q factor of the resonant frequency. What does that mean? Well, everyone watching this video has used an EQ before, and you know the Q, or the bandwidth of an EQ, when you turn that up loads, you get really spiky, resonant, ringing, unnatural, colored sounding EQ setting. And that's bad in terms of accuracy of the speakers. We don't want that kind of stuff going on in our speakers. What we want is a really smooth, gentle roll off of the speakers with a low, gentle Q. That's good. How do we get a low Q factor? Well, we have to have big speakers and we have to have good amounts of damping as well and some other stuff, but predominantly one of the main things influencing the Q of the overall speaker is going to be the size of the cabinet. Here's a very popular studio monitor. A lot of people believe that this is transparent and low distortion. Now let's put it next to a 50 Hz wave. It looks absolutely microscopic and bears no resemblance in its proportions to that 6.8 meters long wave. Now, in the manual, it doesn't only claim to be able to reproduce 50 Hz, it almost looks on the chart like it's ruler flat down to 50 Hz. Now, let's contrast that with these high-end mastering speakers, which cost around $120,000. Now, first thing to note, they look less stupid beside this large wave. They're still not as big as that wave because the wave is 6.8 meters long, but they look more proportional to this low frequency energy. However, inside the speakers, there's a transmission line design. So there's this maze that the sound has to go through to get out of the top of the transmission line opening, and that is around 2.6 meters long. And 2.6 meters, if we now apply our quarter wavelength heuristic, that sounds about right for 50 Hz. In fact, it's way better than just 50 Hz. It could go down sensibly to something around 30 Hz, and that sounds completely legitimate. So the high-end mastering speakers pass the sniff test when it comes to the quarter wavelength heuristic, but when it comes to the popular small studio monitors which cost around $2,000, I start to smell bullshit. Now this is the part of the video when people start to comment, who cares about the quarter wave stuff? You don't know what you're talking about. The chart doesn't lie, and I've done some sine sweeps at my studio at home and everything looked good, so that's that, it's fact. It's just on the chart. You can't lie with the chart. You don't know what you're talking about. You're full of crap. Well, that is the exact type of Dunning-Kruger response that speaker manufacturers are hoping for to flog their undersized speakers to layman punters. The frequency response charts are just designed marketing material to fool people into thinking the speakers are accurate, when the truth is they're about as accurate as a magic 8-ball. Let's start off by understanding how the speaker manufacturers get their low-end response to be better than what it ought be for the size of their cabinets. The first thing that almost all speaker manufacturers use are ports. Ports create resonances in low frequencies so that you can hype up and emphasize the low frequencies around the roll-off frequency so that it can produce more bass than it would naturally produce in a sealed box configuration. The second one is probably passive radiators. A lot of manufacturers are using these nowadays because some people turn their nose up, quite rightly, at ports, and so they use passive radiators instead, so people are fooled into thinking that it's a sealed enclosure just with an additional speaker on the side, but it's not a speaker cone, it's just a sort of pseudo speaker which sits there and it's not connected to electricity, and it just sort of wobbles in harmony with the resonances in the box. And this has a very similar kind of effect to a port. The third weapon of choice for the modern speaker manufacturer to create more bass in a small enclosure is a high excursion driver. Now, high excursion drivers, all that means is normally a driver maybe moves that much or something, or a high excursion one can move like way more. It can just push more air because it's just moving in and out more dramatically. Now, this can produce more bass because it's just moving more air by moving in and out more than a normal driver typically can. And the fourth most common thing on the list is going to be EQ. So if the frequency response is uneven, you can just use some EQ in there, whether it's digital or an analog type approach. You just use some EQ to try and even that out a bit. Okay, so problem solved, right? There's no reason to spend all of this money on the high-end mastering speakers and get massive speakers because modern technology won and old school physics lost. Well, not so fast, because anything you do in the frequency domain has knock-on effects in the time domain. You can't affect one without affecting the other. And using ports and passive radiators and stuff like this causes massive time domain distortion. Okay, but how about high excursion drivers? That sounds fine. The drivers are just working harder. You got a more technologically advanced driver, which can just move more air. There's no downsides to that, right? Wrong. High excursion drivers are awful when it comes to accurate response, because most high-end speaker developers want low excursion drivers. They want to control the excursion of the speaker cone and keep it low, keep it minimal. And with higher quality designs, you can have that excursion really, really low for a good bass output. Speaker manufacturers don't want high excursion for accurate monitoring. And in fact, the more excursion your speaker cone exhibits, the more distortion you get in terms of suspension distortion, which causes harmonic distortion. And that isn't a good thing at all. We want to avoid that at all costs. So we actually want low excursion drivers in high-end speaker systems. So now you've got your tiny little speaker cabinet and you've stuffed a port in there or a passive radiator to try and hype up the bass which is lacking naturally in the enclosure, and you've put a high excursion driver in there to try and force more bass out of this enclosure than would naturally occur, and you've got all sorts of harmonic distortion and intermodulation distortion and time domain distortion and just a whole mess of distortion. But we want a flat response, so people think these speakers are linear and accurate. So what we do is we come along and slap some EQ in there to make everything look even when you do a sine sweep. So now you do a sine sweep, and don't worry about all of the distortion and the horrendous inaccurate sound. It looks linear on the graph. But the most ridiculous thing, this is so ridiculous, I can't think of anything else but to call this a scam, truly. What people don't know is that when you're using resonant stuff like ports and passive radiators, the linearity that you get on that stupid chart, which doesn't mean anything relating to music because sine waves aren't music anyway, but the linearity that you get is SPL dependent. What does that mean? It means when you turn the monitor knob up or down, the linearity of it will change. So when you're actually working on music where you've got notes of different loudnesses and you've got bass that has dynamics and maybe your kick drum is this loud and your bass line is another loudness and stuff like this, the linearity is completely screwed up because it changes at different volumes. So it's just one lie on top of another. It's just a deception. If a speaker manufacturer puts out that chart and someone is gullible enough to look at it and be like, oh, it's accurate because it's a flat line. So yes, the chart is flat when you listen to a sine sweep at a fixed SPL in an anechoic chamber, but when you turn your head this way or you listen at a different volume level, it's not flat anymore. So what a load of marketing nonsense that people fall for. So what can you do about all of this? How can you avoid getting scammed? Well, the answer's simple. Just buy the $120,000 mastering speakers, obviously. What's that? You don't have $120,000 for a pair of speakers? Well, I'm going to come clean. I don't have $120,000 for a pair of speakers myself either. I find that a tiny bit exaggerated as well. However, you can actually get the same ballpark of quality as those elite mastering level speakers for the same price or less, in fact, than those crappy undersized speakers that I was referring to earlier in this video. So here we've got a portable Bluetooth speaker. It's got high excursion drivers, it's got a bit of bass, but it sounds terrible. Here we've got our hi-fi bookshelf speaker. It's a ported design. It's got some bass, but again, it's not very accurate. Now we've got a mastering grade monitor, the Lipinski Sound L505. However, it basically doesn't have any bass. It's not got any ports or anything like that, and it rolls off around 100. Introducing the AP Mastering Model 1. So as you can see, this speaker is much bigger and heavier than the other speakers down there. Why? Because I wanted a large cabinet with low resonances, a lot of damping inside, and just generally a good, accurate reproduction of the bass frequencies, and a massive upgrade from the dual subwoofer setup which I was using with my Lipinski Sound L505 speakers. Now, I'm absolutely convinced with the sound of these. I'm definitely not going to go back to dual subwoofers. I'm just going to stick with large loudspeakers from now on from my own personal studio. Now, what have we got going on here? We've got a 12-inch woofer. We've got two 6-inch mid-woofers and a dome tweeter. Now, as you can see at the top here, we have an opening. Now, that isn't a port. This is the opening of the labyrinth design inside, similar to the high-end mastering speaker we saw earlier in the video. So the bass is produced predominantly by the 12-inch woofer. It goes in, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, and then it goes out. So the total length of the line inside, depending on how you measure it, is somewhere around 2.5 meters long. So this gets very accurate bass all the way down to very low frequencies, and it sounds absolutely phenomenal and accurate in the bass frequencies. So how much am I selling them for then? I'm not. They're mine. You can't have them. But I can tell you how to make them. Firstly, you need to get yourself a pair of Hypex Fusion plate amplifiers. I use the FA123 model, and personally, in my opinion, I think there's absolutely no sensible competition. They've absolutely changed the game in the DIY speaker building community because it's just so easy now to make speakers and power them, and you don't have to deal with crossovers and all that complicated stuff. In hardware form, you can just do it right in software. Absolutely game changing. Secondly, you're going to need some drivers. You're going to need the woofers, the tweeters, and some damping materials and some specialist parts to build the speakers. And you can't get this stuff from Thomann, Music Store, Sweetwater, that kind of stuff. You're going to need a specialist store for that. And I'm in Europe, so over here, the best place to get that is soundimports.eu. It's the best shop that I've found for that. Thirdly, you've got to buy some stuff from your local hardware shop, some materials, some wood, maybe some tools if you don't have them already, but you should be able to do everything for less than 2K. But here's the deal. If you want to build them for less than 2K, you're going to have to build them yourself, or maybe with a friend or your dad or something like that. And secondly, you're going to need enough space. If you've got some sort of tiny studio, then no speakers are going to sound good there. You need enough space to actually have your speakers set up with a bit of room around them and pull your desk back a bit and have a nice size room. If you've got a tiny room, then nothing's going to sound good in there and you'll be better off buying some headphones. So obviously, this is a pretty substantial DIY build, and there's absolutely no way that I can cram that all into one single YouTube video or even a series of YouTube videos. It's going to be way too much. So what I've done is I've filmed it all as a full-length course, and if you're interested in building these speakers and you're up for a serious DIY challenge and you're interested in audio and having quality high-end mastering level speakers for under 2K, then you can check out the course. It's over at my website. However, if you're not intending on building these speakers, you might want to check out the course anyway, because I go into lots of detail on the theory and why we would want larger speakers and all of the details of what I've got going on here in this particular project. But I've done it in a way which isn't technical, going through formulas and mathematics and really complicated stuff that no one can understand apart from grey-haired people working in some sort of lab somewhere. No, it's like really logical, easy to understand stuff that I'm going through in intuitive ways which actually makes sense. So if you're interested in speaker building, you've always thought it was a bit of a complex thing that you've never really understood, then maybe this is an interesting course for you, even if you're not even considering building the speakers. Now, like I did with my EQ Enlightenment course, I'm going to give an early bird discount for anyone who wants to pre-order it before it comes out. But it's coming out in like a week, so it's not really that long to wait. But if you order it now, pre-order it in that 1 week time, using the code Big Speakers at the checkout, we're going to get 30% off. And when it comes out, then that code is no longer going to work. So if you are interested in the course, then grab it before it actually comes out in the next week. Now, as always, my courses, my free plugins, information about the speakers, everything you'll find on my website, apmastering.com. So before wrapping up the video, I think the question on many people's lips is, well, how do they sound? Well, obviously, they take a massive crap on anything for 2K. Even 3, 4, 5,000 is hilariously better than anything at that price point, because most of the stuff at that price point is going to be too small with ports and passive radiators and stuff which introduces various different kinds of distortion. So they might have a flat frequency response chart like we discussed earlier in the video, but they're probably not the most accurate in terms of time domain and distortion. So the way that I design them, drawing from my influences in my favorite mastering loudspeakers, like from Dunlavy, Lipinski Sound, PMC, these high-end mastering speakers, I designed them to fit in with those high-end mastering speakers, because that's really their DNA. That's where I've drawn the ideas from. I have already transitioned to them as my main mastering speakers, and I'm selling my Lipinski Sound speakers, the amps, the subwoofers. Check out my reverb page. I'll leave a link to it down below. So anyway, if you want more information on these speakers, if you want to grab the course, any of my free plugins or anything like that, head over to my website, apmastering.com, as always. And I hope you got a bit of an insight in this video of why large loudspeakers are not old-fashioned and they're here to stay. In part 2, why Yamaha NS10s and Auratones are not crap despite being small, the small room, small speaker myth, and headphones and workflow.